I watched her from my window, Brenda, on her hands and knees, measuring my grass with a literal plastic ruler. She didn't just hand me the $5,000 fine. She smiled when she did it. When I told her the fine would bankrupt me, she actually laughed.
If you can't afford the standards, maybe you shouldn't live here.
And what I found turned her little kingdom into a crime scene. And what I found turned her little kingdom into a crime scene. She thought she was the queen of the neighborhood. She was wrong.
We moved in on a Tuesday. It was one of those hot, sticky days in July where the air feels like it has weight to it. I remember standing in the driveway, looking up at the house. It wasn't a mansion. It was just a standard 2-story suburban home with tan siding and a 2-car garage. But to me and my wife, Sarah, it was a palace. We had spent the last 5 years living in a cramped apartment downtown. We saved every penny. We skipped vacations. We drove cars that were falling apart. We did all of that for this moment. A backyard for the dog. A spare room for a future nursery. A driveway that was actually ours. I took a deep breath, smelling the fresh-cut grass and the mulch from the flower beds. We made it, Sarah said, walking up beside me and squeezing my hand. Yeah, I said, we finally made it. We were naive. We thought we were buying a home. We didn't realize we were buying a ticket into a war zone. The first sign of trouble showed up 3 hours later. I was carrying a box of books into the garage when I heard a throat clear behind me. It was a sharp, deliberate sound, like someone demanding attention. I turned around. Standing at the end of my driveway was a woman. She looked to be in her early 60s. She was wearing a floral blouse that was pressed a little too perfectly and khaki shorts. But the most important thing about her was what she was holding. In her left hand, she had a clipboard. In her right hand, she had a pen poised like a weapon. Hi there, I said, putting on my best friendly neighbor smile. I'm Mike. My wife, Sarah, is inside. You're parking on the incline, she said. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't say welcome. She just pointed at the moving truck. Oh, sorry, I said, glancing at the truck. The back was maybe 2 inches onto the slope of the curb. We're just unloading. It'll be gone in an hour. She tapped the pen against the clipboard. Tap, tap, tap. Section 4, Article C of the Community Guidelines clearly states that commercial vehicles cannot obstruct the flow of traffic or damage the curb infrastructure. You need to move it. I blinked. The street was wide. There were no other cars coming. I understand, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Like I said, we're just moving in. Can we just finish unloading the couch? She stared at me. Her eyes were cold. There was no empathy there. Just a strict adherence to a rule book I hadn't even read yet. I'll give you 20 minutes, she said. I'm Brenda, president of the HOA. She turned and walked away before I could respond. As she walked, I watched her stop at a neighbor's house, inspect their mailbox, make a note on her clipboard, and keep walking. Friendly lady, Sarah said, appearing in the garage doorway. Yeah, I muttered, a real ray of sunshine. For the first 2 months, things were quiet. We kept our heads down. We unpacked. We mowed the lawn every Saturday morning like clockwork. I waved at Brenda whenever I saw her patrolling the neighborhood, which was every single day. She never waved back. She just watched. Then the first letter arrived. It was a standard white envelope with the HOA logo stamped in the corner. Oak Creek Estates Association. I opened it. Violation notice. Trash receptacle visibility. Description. Trash cans were left visible from the street past 6 p.m. on collection day. Fine. $50. 00. I looked at the clock. It was Tuesday. Trash day. I had gotten home late from work, around 6:30 p.m. I dragged the cans in immediately. Brenda must have been patrolling at 6:01 p.m. $50. Sarah asked, looking over my shoulder, for 30 minutes? It's fine, I said, tossing the letter on the counter. I'll pay it. I don't want to start a fight over $50. Lesson learned. I paid the fine. I thought that would be the end of it. It was just a welcome to the neighborhood tax. I was wrong. Paying that fine was like bleeding in shark-infested waters. It didn't make them go away. It just showed them that I would pay. 3 weeks later, I got another letter. Violation notice. Improper holiday decor. Description: Halloween decorations placed prior to October 1st. It was September 28th. I had put out a single pumpkin on the porch. Fine, $75. 00. 2 weeks after that. Violation notice. Garage door appearance. Description: Garage door remained open for more than 2 consecutive hours. I was cleaning the garage that day. I was in the garage the whole time. Fine, $100. 00. It started to feel personal. I talked to my neighbor, Dave, about it. Dave was a nice guy, a retired mechanic who lived 2 houses down. We were drinking beers on his back patio. Careful to keep the cans out of sight, of course. It's Brenda, Dave said, shaking his head. She targets the new people. She calls it compliance training. She hits you hard in the first year to break you in. If you pay, she keeps doing it. If you fight back, she makes your life hell. So what do? I asked. Keep your head down, Dave advised. Don't give her an inch. Measure your grass. Cleaning your driveway with a toothbrush if you have to. Eventually, she'll get bored and move on to the next victim. I took Dave's advice. I became obsessed. I read the bylaws front to back. I knew exactly how high the grass could be, 3 inches. I knew exactly what color the mailbox had to be, Sherwin-Williams Classic Black. I made sure we were perfect, and for 6 months, it worked. The fine stopped. The letters stopped. I thought I had won. I thought I had beaten Brenda at her own game. Then came the drought. It was a brutal summer. It hadn't rained in 6 weeks. The county issued a strict water conservation order. No watering lawns. Period. If you were caught running sprinklers, the city would hit you with a massive fine. Everyone's grass started to die. The lush green neighborhood turned into a sea of crunchy brown hay. It was ugly, but it was happening to everyone. Or so I thought. I came home from work on a Friday. There was a certified letter taped to my front door. It wasn't in the mailbox. It was taped right at eye level, so I couldn't miss it. My stomach dropped. I knew that logo. Oak Creek Estates Association. I ripped it open right there on the porch. I scanned the page, expecting another $50 nuisance fine. Maybe I left the hose out. Maybe my car was dirty. My eyes locked on the number at the bottom of the page. I stopped breathing. Total balance due, $5,000. 00. I blinked. I rubbed my eyes. I looked again. It still said $5,000. I read the description. Violation: failure to maintain landscape aesthetics. Description: homeowner has allowed front lawn to enter a state of decay. Grass is brown, patchy, and unsightly. This constitutes a Class A violation of the community aesthetic standards. As per Article 9, Section 2, failure to remediate dead landscaping results in an immediate fine of $5,000 for replacement costs and property value damages. Are you kidding me? I shouted. I looked at my lawn. Yes, it was brown. But I looked at the house to my left. Brown. The house to my right. Brown. I looked across the street. Brenda's house. Her lawn was emerald green. It was lush. It was perfect. I felt a heat rise up in my chest that I had never felt before. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't frustration. It was pure, unadulterated rage. She was watering her lawn. She was breaking the county law to keep her grass green, and she was fining me $5,000 for following the law. I didn't go inside to tell Sarah. I didn't call Dave. I marched across the street. I still had the letter crumpled in my fist. I walked right up to Brenda's front door and pounded on it. Bang, bang, bang. It took a minute, but the door opened. Brenda stood there, holding a glass of iced tea. She looked at me. Then she looked at the crumpled paper in my hand. A small, smug smile touched the corner of her lips. "Can I help you, Michael?" she asked. "What is this?" I held up the letter. My hand was shaking. $5,000? For dead grass? Everyone's grass is dead. Brenda, it's a drought. She took a sip of her tea. She was calm. Too calm. Not everyone's, she said, looking past me at her own perfect lawn. My grass is fine. The board expects homeowners to take pride in their property. Your lawn is an eyesore. It brings down the value of the entire street. The county banned sprinklers. I yelled, "How are you even watering yours?" Her eyes narrowed. That's none of your concern. The HOA bylaws supersede county recommendations when it comes to property values. You signed a contract, Michael. I'm not paying this, I said, stepping closer. This is extortion. It's insane. Brenda stepped back and started to close the door. You have 48 hours to pay, she said through the crack, or we place a lien on your home. And Michael, we will foreclose. We've done it before. She slammed the door in my face. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I stood there on her porch, staring at the wood grain of her door. I was vibrating with anger. I looked down at her perfect green grass. I wanted to burn it all down. She thought she had me. She thought I was just another young guy who would roll over and pay because he was scared of losing his house. But as I walked back to my house, the fear started to fade, and something else took its place. If she wanted to play by the rules, we were going to play by the rules. All of them. I went inside, walked straight in my office, and turned on my computer. I wasn't going to write a check. I was going to war. I didn't sleep that night. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table with our bank statements spread out in front of her. Her head was in her hands. The only sound in the house was the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sniffle she tried to hide. We don't have it, Mike, she whispered. She didn't look up. We have $3,000 in savings. If we drain the emergency fund, we're still $2,000 short. I stood by the window, staring out at the dark street. Across the way, Brenda's house was dark, but security light illuminated her pristine emerald lawn. It glowed like a radioactive insult. We aren't paying it, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. Inside, I was screaming. If we don't pay, they put a lien on the house, Sarah said, her voice trembling. Brenda wasn't bluffing. I looked it up. In our state, if an HOA forecloses on a lien, they can sell the house at auction to pay the debt. We could lose everything over grass. She looked at me then, her eyes red and puffy. Mike, maybe we can get a loan? Or ask my parents. No, I said sharply. Then I softened. I walked over and knelt beside her chair. Sarah, listen to me. If we pay this, it never ends. Next month, it'll be the roof. Then the driveway. She wants us out. If we pay, we're just funding her harassment. I grabbed the $5,000 violation notice off the table. She gave us 48 hours. I said, that's 2 days. A lot can happen in 2 days. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I needed every second. My first stop wasn't a lawyer. Lawyers cost money I didn't have. My first stop was a county clerk's office. I had a theory. It was a small, nagging thought in the back of my brain. Brenda's lawn wasn't just green. It was swampy. I had stepped on the edge of her property the night before, and my shoe had sunk an inch into the mud. In a drought like this, you don't get mud from hand watering with a watering can. You get mud from industrial-grade irrigation. But the county had shut off all irrigation lines. If you turn on your sprinklers, the pressure dropped, and the digital meters flagged it immediately. The city sent a fine within days. So how was she doing it? And why hadn't she been caught? I walked into the county records building at 9 a.m. sharp. It was a drab government building with flickering fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee and dust. I pulled a ticket and waited. When my number was called, I walked up to the counter. A woman named Patty sat there, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else on earth. Help you, she mumbled. Hi, Patty. I need to pull the public utility records for my street, specifically water usage and infrastructure maps for Oak Creek Estates. She sighed, a long, heavy sound that seemed to deflate her entire body. That's a lot of paperwork. You check the online portal? The portal only goes back 3 years. I lied. I hadn't checked the portal. I needed the physical blueprints. I need the original development maps from when the neighborhood was built. She rolled her eyes but stood up. Fill out this form. I'll be back in 20. While I waited, I pulled out my phone and opened the HOA community app. There was a new post from Brenda. Friendly reminder, all fines for aesthetic violations are due immediately. Let's keep our neighborhood beautiful. Also, the board has approved a new vendor for the common area landscaping. Welcome to Greenview Solutions. I frowned. We had just changed landscapers 3 months ago. Why were we changing again? And why did the name Greenview Solutions sound so generic? Patty came back with a thick roll of blue-tinted paper. She thumped it onto the counter. Original water main maps, she said. Don't rip 'em. I unrolled the maps. They were dated 15 years ago. I traced the thick blue lines that represented the city water mains. They ran down the center of the street, with smaller lines branching off to each house. I found my house. Standard connection. I found Dave's house. Standard connection. Then I found Brenda's house. I squinted. There was the standard line going to her meter, but there was something else. A faint, dotted line that ran from the community clubhouse, which was directly behind her lot, straight through her backyard. On the map, it was labeled Emergency Fire Relief Valve, Do Not Obstruct. My heart skipped a beat. A fire relief valve meant high pressure. It meant water that bypassed the residential meters because it was intended for fire trucks. If someone were to, say, tap into that line, they would have unlimited high-pressure water. And because it was technically part of the common area infrastructure, the bill wouldn't go to the homeowner. It would go to the HOA. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the map. Patty, I said, my voice rising a little, can I see the billing records for the HOA common areas? Specifically the clubhouse water bill? Public record, she shrugged. She typed into her computer. She printed out a sheet. I snatched it up. Oak Creek clubhouse water usage. January. $200 February. $200 June. Drought $4,500. There it was. The smoking gun. The clubhouse pool had been drained and closed for repairs all summer. There was zero reason for the usage to spike. Brenda wasn't just stealing water. She was stealing our water. We paid the HOA dues. The HOA paid the clubhouse bill. We were literally paying for the water she was using to keep her grass green, the same grass she was using to shame us into paying fines. It was perfect. It was evil, but it wasn't enough. Proving she was stealing water would get her a fine, maybe kicked off the board, but it wouldn't fix my $5,000 problem immediately. She could still file the lien before the police investigated. I needed something faster. I needed to know why she was so desperate for cash now. Why the sudden aggressive fines? Why the $5,000 threats to me and 3 other neighbors in the same week? I remember the post on the app. Greenview Solutions. I sat down at a computer terminal in the corner of the lobby. I pulled up the state Secretary of State business search. I typed in Greenview Solutions. Status. Active. Incorporation date. 2 days ago. My eyebrows shot up. The company was 2 days old. The same day she fined me. I clicked on the filing history. I needed to see the registered agent. The owner. The screen loaded. Registered agent. Thomas J. Miller. I didn't know a Thomas Miller. I felt a pang of disappointment. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe Brenda was just corrupt, but not that stupid. I sat back, rubbing my temples. I was missing something. I had the water theft, but I needed the connection to the money. I pulled up the HOA board member list on my phone. President, Brenda Miller. Wait, Brenda Miller. I had never known her last name. Everyone just called her Brenda. But there it was. I looked back at the screen. Thomas J. Miller. Husband? Son? I did a quick Facebook search. It took me 30 seconds to find Brenda's profile. It was mostly locked down, but her profile picture was her and a man on a boat. The caption read, "Happy 40th anniversary to my wonderful husband, Tom." I felt a cold chill run down my spine. Brenda had created a fake landscaping company in her husband's name. She was firing the old legitimate landscapers. She was hiring her husband's shell company. And the $5,000 fines? She wasn't collecting them for the neighborhood reserve fund. She was frantically trying to fill the HOA bank account so she could pay the first invoice to Greenview Solutions before anyone noticed the money was missing. Or worse, she had already drained the accounts, and she needed our fines to cover the tracks. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:45 p.m. The county clerk's office closed at 4:30. I had 45 minutes. I had the dots, but I didn't have the picture. I needed the bylaws. I needed to see exactly what power the board had to sign contracts without a community vote. I ran back to the counter. "Patty," I shouted a little too loud, "I need the HOA articles of incorporation and the bylaws for Oak Creek. Now." She glared at me, but she moved. She handed me a dusty binder. I flipped through it frantically. Page 1. Page 10. Page 50. I found a section on vendor contracts. Any contract exceeding $2,000 must be approved by a majority vote of the homeowners during a quarterly meeting. She hadn't held a vote. She simply announced it on the app. Then I turned the page to board member compensation. Board members shall serve on a volunteer basis and may not profit, directly or indirectly, from HOA funds. I pulled out my phone and took photos of every page. My hands were shaking again, but not from fear this time. It was adrenaline. I had her. I had her on fraud. I had her on embezzlement. I had her on theft of utility services. I packed up my papers. I felt like I was carrying a nuclear bomb in my backpack. I walked out of the county building and into the blinding afternoon sun. I pulled out my phone to call Sarah and tell her we were going to be okay. But before I could dial, a notification popped up on my screen. It was an email from the HOA. Subject: Notice of lien filing. Dear homeowner, due to non-payment of the $5,000 violation fee, the board has expedited the lien process. Legal proceedings for foreclosure will begin on Monday morning. She was moving faster than I thought. She knew. Somehow, she knew I was digging. I looked at the time. It was Friday afternoon. The courts were closed until Monday. She had filed the paperwork electronically just under the wire. I stood on the sidewalk, the traffic rushing past me. I had all the evidence, but the legal system was slow. By the time a lawyer untangled this, my credit would be ruined and the foreclosure notice would be public record. I didn't need a lawyer. I didn't need a judge. I needed to stop her tonight. There was an emergency HOA meeting scheduled for 7 p.m. at the clubhouse. Brenda had called it to discuss the new landscaping improvements. I looked at my reflection in the window of the county building. I looked tired. I looked disheveled. But I smiled. I wasn't going to that meeting to listen. I was going to that meeting to burn her kingdom to the ground. I pulled into my driveway at 5:15 p.m. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. Sarah met me at the door. She was holding her phone, her face pale. "The bank called," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They got a notice about the lien. Mike, they froze our line of credit. If we don't fix this, my credit score tanks by Monday." I walked past her, dropped my backpack on the kitchen table, and unzipped it. I pulled out the stack of photos, the blueprints, and the printouts from the Secretary of State. "Let them freeze it," I said. "By Monday, Brenda won't be the president. She'll be a defendant." I laid everything out. It looked like a conspiracy theorist's wall. The water maps, the clubhouse bills, the fake company registration. What is all this? Sarah asked, picking up the photo of the Greenview Solutions document. "This," I said, pointing to the name Thomas J. Miller, "is our way out. Sarah, I need you to go to the office supply store. Right now." "Why?" "I need 50 copies of this packet," I said. "Stapled, organized. One for every chair at the meeting tonight." Sarah looked at the papers, then at me. For the first time in days, the fear in her eyes was replaced by something else. "Hope. 50 copies," she nodded. "I'll be back in 20 minutes. The Oak Creek Community Clubhouse was a small brick building next to the pool. Usually it smelled like chlorine and floor wax. Tonight, it smelled like tension. I walked in at 6:55 p.m. Sarah was right beside me, carrying a heavy tote bag full of packets. The room was packed. Usually, HOA meetings had maybe 5 people, mostly the board and the elderly. Tonight, every seat was taken. People were standing in the back. The aggressive fines had done their job. Everyone was terrified, and everyone wanted answers. At the front of the room sat the board. 3 people at a folding table. 2 of them looked nervous, shuffling papers. And in the middle sat Brenda. She looked impeccable, hair sprayed into a helmet of perfection, a pearl necklace, and that same smug, untouchable expression. She tapped her gavel, a literal wooden gavel she had brought herself, on the table. "If everyone could take a seat," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "We have a lot to get through tonight." I didn't sit. I stood in the back, near the door. Sarah stood next to me. "First item on the agenda," Brenda announced. "The drought crisis. As you know, the board has had to take strict measures to maintain property values. Some of you have received notifications." A rumble of angry murmurs went through the crowd. "This is for the greater good," Brenda said, raising her voice slightly. "We cannot allow our community to look like a slum." Which brings us to our exciting news. We have hired a new premium landscaping firm, Greenview Solutions, to revitalize the common areas. She held up a glossy brochure. They will be starting Monday. To cover this premium service, the board has voted to increase monthly dues by $150, effective immediately. The room exploded. $150? You're already fining us thousands. I can't afford that. Brenda banged the gavel. Bang, bang, bang. "Order, order, or I will have you removed," she shouted. The room quieted down, simmering with resentment. This is not up for debate. The contract is signed. She scanned the room, her eyes landing on me in the back. She smiled, a predator looking at prey. "Now, is there any new business from the floor? Please keep comments to 2 minutes." I stepped forward. "I have a comment," I said. My voice was loud. "Clear." Brenda rolled her eyes. "Michael, as I told you, your fine is a personal matter. This meeting is for community issues only. Sit down." "It is a community issue," I said, walking down the center aisle. I held up the blue-tinted water map. "It's about the water bill." Brenda froze. Her eyes flicked to the paper in my hand. She recognized it. "You are out of order," she snapped. "Officer at arms, remove him." The officer at arms was just Mr. Henderson, an 80-year-old man who barely knew where he was. He stayed seated. I kept walking until I was 10 feet from the table. I turned to face the crowd. Does anyone wonder why the clubhouse water bill was $4,000 last month? I asked the room. When the pool was closed? The neighbors looked at each other. "He's lying." Brenda shrieked. She stood up, knocking her chair back. "He's disgruntled because he broke the rules. Don't listen to him." I went to the county today. I continued, ignoring her. I pulled the records. "Brenda, do you want to tell them about the fire relief valve in your backyard? The one connected to the clubhouse meter?" The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the vending machine in the hall. "That's absurd," Brenda stammered. Her face was turning a blotchy red. That's private infrastructure. It's stolen water," I said. "You've been using the neighborhood's money to water your lawn. That's why yours is green and ours is brown. We're paying for your prize-winning grass." "Brenda." "Liar," she screamed. "I'll sue you for slander. I'll take your house." "You can try," I said, "but you'll have to explain this first." I signaled Sarah. She started moving down the rows, handing out the packets. Thump, thump, thump. People grabbed them hungry for the truth. "Page 2, I directed the crowd. "Look at the Secretary of State filing for Greenview Solutions." I heard the rustle of 50 pages turning at once. Then a gasp from the front row. It was Dave. "Thomas J. Miller." Dave read aloud. He looked up at Brenda. "That's your husband." "It's a coincidence." Brenda yelled. She was sweating now. The pearls looked like they were choking her. "It's a common name. Is the address a coincidence too?" I asked, Because the registered business address for Greenview Solutions is 42 Oak Creek Drive. Your house, Brenda. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. It went from confusion to mob mentality. People stood up. "You hired your husband?" someone shouted. "Where's our money going?" "I paid a $200 fine last week." "Did you pocket that?" Brenda looked around, wild-eyed. She was losing control, and she knew it. She looked at the other two board members. "Help me," she hissed at them. "Shut this down." The treasurer, a quiet woman named Susan, looked at the packet in her hands. She looked at the bank statements I had included showing the drain on the reserve funds. Susan slowly stood up. She picked up her things. "I didn't know," Susan said to the room. Her voice was shaking. I resign, effective immediately." She walked off the stage. The other board member followed her. Brenda was alone. She stood there, gripping the edge of the table. Her knuckles were as white as mine had been. She looked at the 50 angry faces staring back at her. "You people are ungrateful," she spat. "I do everything for this community. I keep the property values up. I keep the riffraff out." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "And you? You think you're smart? You've just destroyed this board. The HOA will collapse without me. The banks will freeze the accounts. Your property values will plummet to zero." She grabbed her gavel and slammed it down one last time. Meeting adjourned. She grabbed her purse and tried to storm off the stage. Not adjourned. A deep voice said from the doorway. We all turned. Standing in the doorframe were 2 uniformed police officers and a man in a cheap suit holding a briefcase. The man in the suit stepped forward. "Mrs. Brenda Miller?" he asked. Brenda stopped dead in her tracks. She looked like a trapped animal. "Who are you?" she demanded. "I'm Detective Harris, Fraud Division," the man said. "And we need to have a conversation about the misappropriation of funds and grand larceny." I looked at Brenda. The color drained from her face completely. She looked at me. I held up the little crumpled violation notice for $5,000. "I think you can cancel this," I said. "You know how in movies, when the villain gets caught, they usually scream, they yell, 'You'll never take me alive,' or they try to run. Real life isn't like that. Real life is quieter, and somehow that makes it scarier." When Detective Harris told Brenda they needed to have a conversation about grand larceny, she didn't run. She didn't scream. She just deflated. It was like watching a balloon lose its air. Her shoulders slumped. Her chin, usually held so high with arrogance, dropped to her chest. She looked at her husband, Tom, who was standing by the back wall. He had been trying to blend into the wallpaper since I mentioned his name. "Tom," she whispered. Tom didn't look at her. He was looking at the floor, probably calculating how much jail time he was facing for being the registered agent of a fraudulent company. The officers escorted Brenda out of the clubhouse. It was a slow walk. The entire room, 50 of my neighbors, parted like the Red Sea. No one said a word. There was no cheering, no booing, just the sound of heavy boots on the linoleum floor and the soft click of handcuffs being tightened. I walked out to the parking lot to watch. Sarah stood beside me, her hand gripping my arm. Blue and red lights washed over the neighborhood. They bounced off the brick facades of the houses Brenda claimed to protect. They illuminated the Greenview Solutions truck parked illegally in a handicap spot. As they put her in the back of the cruiser, she looked up, her eyes locked onto mine through the window. There was no hate left in them, just confusion. She truly believed she was a hero of this story. She believed she deserved that money because she was the only one who cared about the rules. That was the scariest part. She wasn't evil for the sake of being evil. She was evil because she thought she was better than us. The cruiser drove away, taking the Queen of Oak Creek with it. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, auditors, and confusion. With the entire board resigned or arrested, the neighborhood was a ship without a captain. A court-appointed receiver came in to manage the HOA while the investigation unfolded. I sat down with the forensic accountant a month later. We met in the same clubhouse where Brenda had tried to ruin me. "It's worse than we thought," the accountant said, sliding a thick binder across the table. How much? I asked. Well, the water theft was just the tip of the iceberg, he explained. She was pumping about $4,000 worth of water a month during the peak summer months. But that's pennies compared to the reserve fund. He flipped the page. Over the last 5 years, Brenda and her husband funneled nearly $300,000 out of the HOA accounts. My jaw dropped. $300,000? Yep. Kickbacks from contractors. Fake invoices for roof repairs that never happened. The landscaping scheme with Greenview was just their latest attempt to drain the last bit of liquidity before the fiscal year ended. He pointed to a line item. And those fines? The $5,000 assessments for the grass? Yeah, I said, leaning in. She wasn't depositing them, he said. We found a second bank account under a DBA name. Every time a neighbor paid a fine out of fear, it went straight into her personal travel fund. That boat photo you found on Facebook? That was paid for by the Smith family's illegal fence fine. I felt sick. I thought about the Smith family. They were a young couple with 3 kids. They moved out last year because they said they couldn't afford the neighborhood anymore. Now I knew why. Brenda had bled them dry to pay for a cruise. What happens now? I asked. Well, the accountant said, closing the binder. The DA is throwing the book at them. Racketeering, fraud, embezzlement, theft of services. They're looking at 10 to 15 years. Mandatory. And the money? He sighed. Gone. Spent on cars, vacations, and that perfect lawn. But we are seizing assets. Starting with the house at 42, Oak Creek Drive. The auction happened 4 months later. It was a cold November morning. The leaves had fallen, and the trees were bare. The sign in Brenda's front yard didn't say Greenview Solutions anymore. It said foreclosure auction, public sale. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. She had threatened to foreclose on my home because of some brown grass. Now, the state was foreclosing on her home because of her greed. I didn't bid. I just watched from my porch with a cup of coffee. A young couple bought it. They looked nice. They looked excited. They had no idea that the previous owner used to measure the grass with a ruler. I walked over to introduce myself after the auctioneer left. Hi, I said, shaking the guy's hand. I'm Mike. I live across the street. Nice to meet you, he said, beaming. I'm Dan. We're so excited. The neighborhood seemed so quiet. It is now, I smiled. It is now. He looked down at the lawn. Brenda's famous, emerald green lawn. Without her illegal water line running, the city had capped it immediately. The grass had died. It was just as brown and patchy as mine. First thing we got to do is fix this yard. Dan laughed, kicking a dirt clod. It's a mess. Don't worry about it, I said, and I meant it. Take your time. Nobody around here is going to find you. Life returned to normal, but it was a different kind of normal. We formed a new board. I refused to be president. I had seen enough of that power trip to last a lifetime, but I agreed to serve as treasurer. We rewrote the bylaws. We capped fines at $50. We made every expenditure public on a website anyone could check. We turned the fire relief valve into a community garden tap, properly metered and paid for. And my $5,000 fine? I framed it. It hangs in my home office, right above my desk. It's not a trophy. It's a reminder. It reminds me that bullies only have power if you let them. It reminds me that authority is often just a mask for insecurity. And it reminds me that sometimes the hardest thing to do is to stand up when everyone else is keeping their head down. Sarah walked into the office one evening while I was staring at the framed letter. She placed a hand on my shoulder. You okay? She asked. Yeah, I said. I'm good. You know, she said, smiling, the grass is finally coming back. I looked out the window. The drought had broken a few weeks ago. The rain had returned. And slowly, naturally, without any stolen water or chemicals, the green was creeping back into our lawns. It wasn't perfect. There were weeds. There were patches. It wasn't a uniform, plastic-looking perfection Brenda had demanded. It was messy. It was real. And it was ours. It looks perfect, I said. I turned off the light, and we walked out of the room, leaving the $5,000 threat in the dark where it belonged.